Another comment, Chief Justice Bowman, that I think you made about the importance of tax law and applying to more people. I try to remember the context of that one as well.
Gosh, I don't know. I'm sure I've said that on quite a number of occasions where tax law it affects many people. You know, very few people are involved in criminal law or anything like that, but tax law, they all are.
Everyone's affected by tax. Isn't that right? Yeah. Yeah. By the way, Don is a tremendous educator. When I approached Don a number of years ago, and I asked him to give me a personal one-on-one course on litigation, I felt really nervy asking him, out of place, right? And he said, well, he says, you're asking me to give you a one-on-one course on litigation? And he says, the short answer is, I knew it was worth asking. He paused for a very extended silence, and he said, yes. So I always say that I learn from the best. And this is the man here who was responsible for a big part of my professional career and things we do. So, and by the way, thank you for coming. Anyway, moving on from this. Again, we already talked about this. We talked about the fact that you know, there's issues here. By the way, the old purpose test that existed, there was a purpose test in 55-2 previously, but it was less restrictive and it only applied where there was a subsequent capital gain that was reduced by the payment of a dividend. But now it's worse, because what they're saying is that when you're paying a dividend from one company to the other, if the fair market value is reduced. It never said that before. That didn't exist before. And it's pretty clear what they're trying to do. I mean, you have a company that you set up a holdco, you pay up $1 million of dividend, then you dump the company for nothing. You avoided paying tax on this. So you can understand why they implemented it. And slowly over the years, of course, they get rid of a lot of these things. So we clean up the loan, but then the company is successful. They have $2 million of assets. So then they end up with $250,000 of cash. And we already talked about that problem. That company is now offside. The shares will not qualify as small business corporation shares, will they? Because all the assets have to be actively used, and they're more than 10%.
Why is the cash not actively used?
Well, you know, it's a really interesting point. And again, I'm not saying that it can't be argued. But in general, cash is considered a non-active asset. I realize that you need money to run a company. You've got payroll. So I would say that the easy and safest thing to do is stay within the parameters. The parameters are, like, all are substantial, generally means 10%. So if you're within 10%, but you see, the thing is, if you butterfly the money over, you can loan it back, right, to OPCO if it needs it. So I think, you might have a situation where you have higher than 10%, but why take the risk? And CRA these days we find them way too contentious, way too arbitrary. And it does happen that it gets denied. So I think if you had 200,000, right, you'd be okay, but 250, no.
So should get Cisco to pay the payroll?
Well, that's a good point. All right.
Just a question on that.
Sure.
Say somebody was, we'll say, hoarding cash in preparation for some expansion or whatnot, and maybe that's a 12 to 14 month time frame out there. Like, are you suggesting that they're basically, they shouldn't be doing that hoarding that cash within the company? Or?
Yeah, I am. I'm suggesting it because the intent of the legislature was for companies to use the cash in the company to promote the business, to qualify for the capital gains exemption, and not to hoard the cash. So
you're hoarding the cash for a purpose which will probably cause the company to grow down the road. Like,
yep. But
we can build a building without saving for it somewhat.
But the two court cases I mentioned earlier, neither one of them say, if you're planning to expand, then your cash is considered active. It says the cash would have to be a mandatory precedent to trade in the Supreme Court of Canada decision. Tax Court of Canada decision says that if the withdrawal of the cash would have to have a decidedly destabilizing effect on the company. If your argument is, we're going to expand and we're using this money to expand, it's not good enough. Simply not good enough, because that's not what it says. That's not the court cases. So the argument you just used, by the way, is a good argument, and we've been using it for years, effectively, but not anymore.
Like, yeah, plans and drawings and engineering, all that stuff, and they wouldn't accept something like that, do you think?
I would say I'd rather not risk it.
Yeah, well, that isn't the same cash at that point in time, because then you start spending. If you're talking about when you start spending, that's forming the asset.
I suppose.
You don't
Maybe,
have
I
cash.
don't know.
I'm going through right now.
He seems to be saying, no, it's not enough. I
I've
don't
got a
know.
client going
It's
through it
crazy.
right now, they're building the building. Well, they spent the last 2 years on the architecture, starting to do some of the preliminary prep work for the site, and that's all, that's not cash, that's a,
No, I get that, but
that's a fixed asset.
it sounds like it
It's
might
just development of that fixed
Yeah,
asset.
be an
so,
issue still.
sorry, that hoarding of the cash, you have to make sure it's not more than 50% of the assets.
Well, that's,
24 months.
yeah, for 12 months.
90% when it's like that, close to over 10%, you can fix that the day before you sell the shares.
You can, but one thing you can't plan for, though. What do you think? What is that?
Yeah.
And what's death? What happens at death if you went through your shares?
You meet position the day before, or when is it? The day
Immediately.
Prior.
Immediately prior to-
Just prior.
Simultaneously.
So unless you have some way of planning the day of your death, it's not going to work. Here's another problem. I had somebody say to me recently, well, you know what, we'll do it a few years down the road. My accountant said, let's do it another 5-6 years, and we're 62, and we got $7 million of cash within 3 companies, and we're not going to worry about it. Well, let's put it this way. If you don't wait until you have a buyer at the door before you purify, right? Because come back in 24 months. Well, a buyer might lose interest in that company. So it's better to purify and keep it purified. It's better to have a methodology that allows you to purify so that they don't have to our clients don't have to keep paying us to do it. So we're not saying, keep doing butterflies. I mean, we can do these all day long. We can do it all year, every year, okay, without any issue. But in reality, this guy's got the same problem, okay? Yes, he's got the loan out, but then he's building up cash. He's got another problem.
Okay, so cash would be considered passive. Accounts receivable?
No,
No.
Active.
that's active.
Right.
How much
Prepaid-
cash can you
prepaid
have
expense?
before it's considered excessive?
All right,
3
so-
months of operating, 4 months, 6 months?
You know what? I'm going to say that 10%. Like if you want to be safe, say 10%. That's all or substantially all. Like 90% is all or substantially all. What's left over is 10. And that includes all of your active assets. But don't forget, it's not because you can loan it back, I don't see it as a hardship. Because you can loan it from Cisco back to OPCO again.
You need another corporation, then you need another tax return, then you need, it's all this complication that.
Need more
Gave me
bank,
the-
Granted.
need more bank charges?
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, you've got a nil return in Cisco too. It's not like a huge amount of cost necessarily to do that, right?
Does it have to be an actual transaction, you can just do a journal entry?
No, the Income Tax Act states that you have to have in 110, 615C, I think, that it cannot be done through accounting journals. So accounting journals are insufficient. It has to be real, right?
So the whole 50% of assets actively involved in the business or anything like that, if you're filing a tax return and you are an accountant and you had the misfortune of picking April 30th as your year end, your cash is going to look really excessive as at April 30th because that's when you made all your money. CRA isn't going to walk in and make, audit you or make any sort of. This is only to do with selling shares. The only time we really have to worry about it, it doesn't matter if our T2 looks a little wonky for a period of time or whatever. It's just when you're selling shares, the only time we care about it.
Exactly.
Or 2 years.
Or when you die?
Or if you die.
Yeah.
So if you died and you were
Yeah, don't
offside,
die on May 1.
there's no capital gains exemption. If you were onside, there would have been a capital gains exemption.
That's right.
If you didn't use it.
Another thing we see, it's not on here, but sometimes we see situations, okay, we have this company we've run for years. Well, it's passed the business on to the next generation. We see, the adult children set up a new company, move all the clients over. What's the problem with that? But we see it happening across Canada, which is a concern. taxable disposition of those, that,
The goodwill, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon either, believe it or not. Well, it's not that common, but we see it often enough that I wish I didn't see it often enough.
You can't just argue that the clients went at their own accord and
No,
no
you
value in the deemed disposition?
You can argue it, but it's risky.
Yeah.
Like, you get somebody who comes in and asks a few questions like what we do, and we find that out, and he's a guy from CRA who's not too reasonable. He's looking to find a pound of flesh. He's just found one.
Plus they put you in, if you go to court, I guess they put you under oath, and then you don't want to perjure yourself, make it worse, right?
It is a tough one, though, and it's just there's some simple planning techniques that you can do to pass the company on to the next generation.
So just on this, we did the single butterfly already, so we already put the initial loan or the initial cash. So 3 years later, we come up, OpCo still has another round of excess cash. We're just gonna dividend that over to Cisco and loan it back,
You can,
right? We don't have to do another whole transaction to move that money out.
yeah. So basically, you already did it once.
Get the structure set up.
With this structure, you have to keep doing it. To purify every year, you have money building up, you got to pay it over. This is not a great structure like it stands.
I thought you redeemed the shares, so how do you dividend it over?
Well, every time you do it, you issue new shares, and then you redeem them
Do a
again.
butterfly transaction every time over to
Yeah.
that.
We actually issue the share certificates to the guy. Yeah, and then they just go from here to here to here. And why is it called a single wing butterfly?
Because you're
It's going one
only
way.
asset one way.
Okay, why is it called a butterfly? Where does the name come from?
It looks like a butterfly.
Precisely. You think about that.
And it
you
stings like a
pay, it resembles the wings of a butterfly opening and closing. And that's essentially the series of transactions that take place. That's it.
So the recurring single butterfly.
Yeah, no, we don't want it to be recurring because it's expensive to do, right? We don't want to have to, our clients keep doing it. I mean, I guess for us, business point of view, it'd be good. We prefer not to do it because we say, okay, look, let's set up a structure, and you don't need us anymore for a while, right?
So is your question been answered then?
I think so, because we are doing butterfly.
You are doing the
Every-
butterfly.
whatever.
Every time you need to get that
Every
cash
year,
flow.
every year.
No, but every time that excess, that builds up.
Yeah, it can be done. I mean, I've had people say, oh, I just want to do the butterfly, I don't want to do anything more. And then the next year, we're back again. And they say, okay, we have to do all of it. Well, you had to have done this last year. You wouldn't have to do it every year. Right? And then they finally say, okay, fine, because they get tired of paying us.
So it's not a long-term solution, really. I mean, you have to keep redoing this over and over again. And that client that has to be clearly made, that they understand that.
Yeah, so the problem is this, like you can do safe income calculations because you remember that the purpose test in 55.2 doesn't apply to safe income, right? But what's wrong with doing that? Well, clearly they're tedious, expensive. You have to go back to the V-Day or the beginning of the corporation, right? And the other issue is they can be challenged by CRA, and they have. There's case law that is not very favorable, challenging phantom income and ITCs and all kinds of other forms of income. So to some extent, you're better to butterfly than do safe income calculations. You don't have to do the safe. You don't have to worry about whether it's safe income or not if you're butterflying. Just do them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's basically like just showing this continual butterfly thing. We've already covered it, right? This is what we've already talked about too, right? It's the same thing we already discussed. You have the $2 million of assets sitting in OpCo, and you've paid up the $250,000 dividend to the RealCo or HoldCo, whatever you want to call it. And so that's how this guy's decided to deal with it. He already moved his loan over, and then he decided to pay his $250 up, but got caught again. That's all. He just got caught again. Doesn't work like that, right? So you got to be careful that you're putting the right amount over. And that's also something else that we've been talking about as well, is just the definition of this. So there's two things really. Does it increase the cost? Or does it result in increasing the cost, or does it result in increasing the decreasing the value of the shares?